Thanks, everyone. I have to say, the last time I was at a public event with Marianne, I spoke first. This is very hard. I feel like I've been kicked in a certain part of my anatomy. I was, for my sins, I was many years the director of religious studies at UC Berkeley, and there was a cliche that we used to hear all the time there, that you really can't describe the transcendental reality. And I remember one of my colleagues getting up and running out of a meeting one time and saying, if I hear one more person say you really can't describe the transcendental reality, I think I'm heading for the bathroom. I just got to throw up. Well, we have a similar cliche in our own field, which is that peace begins within. And I remember my friend Jim Forrest, who is the director of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation, coming back from Europe one time, and he'd been at a meeting in Italy. He was kind of white and shaken, and I said, Jim, what's the matter? And he said, well, Michael, I finally figured out the purpose of the peace movement. So I said, for heaven's sake, tell me, I've been in this thing for so many years. He said, the purpose of the peace movement is to take the angriest people in the world and keep them out of the military. Well, we want to take a much more positive approach, less cliched approach. And I think I'd like to actually start, what I said before doesn't count. Now I'm starting. As Richard Nixon said, before I start my speech, I'd like to say something. I'd like to say something. This is a quotation from one of my favorite scriptures. It's from an ancient Indian text called the Chandogya Upanishad, and I'm going to quote the translation that was done by my spiritual teacher, who's also Stephanie's spiritual teacher, Sri Eknath Ishwaran of the Blue Mountain Center of Meditation. The quote is very simple, but it's extremely telling and defining for our situation here today. And that quote is, as great as the infinite world without is the world within the lotus of the heart. For the last 350 years or so, we have been conquering the outside world and ignoring the inside world. And practically every problem we're facing in our society and on the planet today, even problems that seem to have to do with drastically distant things like global warming and so forth, really arise from our ignoring of our inner capacities within. So in the Bhagavad Gita, as you can tell I'm kind of in a Vedantic mood this morning, in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a set of 3 questions and a statement about 3 questions we need to ask ourselves in chapter 7. And the statement is that there are only 3 things we need to know in life. Who is God? Who are you? And what is the nature of action? Because action is the connection between our inner capacity, the God within us, and the world that we live in, our family without. And it gives 3 guidelines. It goes on, the text, the Bhagavad Gita goes on to give 3 guidelines to human action. And as you'll see from these guidelines, they all depend upon inner development. Those guidelines are, choose the right action, do it by the right means, and have the right relationship to the result. The right relationship to the result is the hardest part. To do the right action, you need wisdom. To use the right method, you need to understand nonviolence. And I'm going to say 2 things right now about nonviolence. Stephanie will say a little bit more, and we'll say a lot more at the breakout session, or what we like to call the breakthrough session. So these are quotes exactly parallel from Martin Luther King and from Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi said, I have made the one supreme discovery to conserve my anger. And just as anger conserved, just as steam conserved can become a power that can drive a machine, anger, when conserved, can become a power that can change the world. So when we talk about inner peace, we're talking about using these negative powers that are locked up inside of us that have come down through our evolution and expressing them in a way that they become positive creative forces. Martin Luther King specified that a little bit more when he said, "We have been accused of leading to outbreaks of violence. We have not led to outbreaks of violence. We have not led to expressions of anger. What we have done is expressed anger under discipline for maximum effect." So this is the key, we believe, at the Metta Center to the inner transformation, which leads to an effective force in the outer world. And I'm happy to share with you that today is the IPO of our roadmap. I was kind of on a cusp between despair and ecstasy when James was talking, because he, I guess, perfectly led up to our material here. The roadmap is a complete kit for a nonviolent revolution, and we will be talking about it in great detail in our breakthrough session. But I'd like Stephanie now to talk a little bit about what the principle. That was an inadvertent violent act. The definition of nonviolence is the intention to harm. I'm sorry, the definition of violence is the intention to harm. I did not intend to do that. I won't touch it anymore. Stephanie.
So thank you, everybody. I'm honored to be here and to represent voices of a generation of 30 and younger. And I'll do that as best as I can, especially representing nonviolence, because so many people in my generation are interested in social change, the Occupy movement, and really, looking at the state of the world that we've inherited and wanting to change that for next generations. So we look at the Metta Center, we look at personal change coming from within. So a lot of times nonviolence is understood in certain circles as just nonviolent communication. But we have a real definition for actual nonviolence, and it's not just direct action, it's not just protest, but it comes from the idea that nonviolence is the successful struggle is the energy released in a successful struggle with a negative drive. So coming from this and struggling with our negative drives, we have 5 ways that we actually encourage people to begin to cultivate that person power. So as opposed to people power, what they coined in 1986 in the people power revolution in the Philippines, which has then started to, create the definition of nonviolence as something that is just about ousting dictators. We try to bring it back with the idea of person power, that it's not about gender binaries. It's not just about getting more women in power. It's asking the question, it's not about putting the right kind of person in power. It's about awakening the right kind of power in people. And that power is nonviolence. And so we say you should adopt a spiritual practice if you don't already have one. Most of us in this room, I'm sure we all have one, but that's our starting place. We recommend in particular passage meditation, which is the use of meditation, the mantra, slowing down, one-pointed attention, training the senses, simplicity, so forth, and we can talk more about that. Learning everything you can about nonviolence while at the same time reducing your exposure to the mass media. Apparently, a study said that we see between 2,000 to 5,000 commercial messages a day. All of these commercial messages telling us that we're separate material entities doomed to compete for scarce resources on a finite planet. So even though we might not, quote, believe it, the fact that we're just being bombarded by it at all times, it means that it's happening somewhere in our subconscious mind that we are still fighting against these drives. So while learning everything we can about nonviolence, we're actually helping to replace that culture that's going deep into us from the society that we're living in today. And from this understanding of replacing the material culture with a culture of nonviolence and really learning about what are the real solutions. There's restorative justice. There's so many examples of nonviolence happening around us today. Let's learn it and let's get involved. And that's what we've done with this roadmap, is we've said that we all belong here. So even though I'm not involved in politics, but I'm involved in new story creation, right? So what does somebody doing new story creation have to do with somebody that's working on peacemaking in Uganda, and that we're all in this room? So let's find a way of coming together and understanding conceptually that we're all part of the movement toward peace, and really, come up with a strategy for, 3 years from now to be a very powerful, strong movement that can address many of the problems that the world is facing today. Thank you.
Mike, please. I just want to say I just love the wisdom that you bring and the fact that nonviolence can be a part of every action in different ways of peace building. And I've enjoyed getting to know you in Petaluma also. So thank you. Next, would like to introduce Nancy Kahn, the Director of Organizational Services at the Bay Area